Scream 7 just released, and yeah, that's right, the 7th Scream movie. I can't be the only one who thinks that's a little ridiculous, right? Given that Scream is a semi-satirical horror franchise, you'd think they'd be self-aware as to how silly a 7th film in the franchise might be. Or maybe they are self-aware. The thing is, I haven't seen it yet, but as I'm here today making this video, I thought that this would be a great time to watch through the full Scream series for the first time to see if it really makes sense to keep this going for this long. I've seen the first movie a long time ago. I really liked it. I haven't seen any of the others. I'm gonna watch through them and then talk to you all about it right now, because it's a video and I'm editing the video and I can just cut to my thoughts. Starting at the beginning with the one movie I actually have seen, the original Scream remains iconic for, in my opinion, one key reason. Unlike many horror movies, this one is genre aware. It knows that it's a horror movie. The characters are fans of them. It plays off the tropes in creative and interesting ways, which is definitely helped by the director, Wes Craven, known for making horror movies like the Nightmare on Elm Street series. The best example of all this genre awareness, which is honestly the best scene in the entire series, is the opening of the very first movie here. The killer, Ghostface, the slasher who hunts down the different characters throughout this movie and the rest of the series, uses horror movie knowledge to hunt down and torture Drew Barrymore's character, whose name I'm forgetting, which sets a very strong tone, but also showing the audience how dangerous this movie is. If the main characters and the killer know how horror movies work, well, you don't really know what to expect then, do you? Throughout the whole movie, there's times where it's like, oh, is this horror movie thing gonna happen? But then it twists into something else because everybody knows what happens in these kinds of movies, and so many movies are genre blind to what happens in horror stuff, so characters will make dumb decisions and do things that'll get them killed. But every time they kind of enter a situation like that in the movie, they call that out. They're like, oh, this is a situation where you're gonna die. So I think that's just a really fun, creative thing. I get very annoyed when movies are very tropey, so I'm happy that this one flips the script, and that's why I think it's great, and why I'm putting it all the way up in S tier. I think this is a really good movie. Just 1 year later, Wes Craven returns to direct an even more meta-slasher film in Scream 2, where the surviving characters return to deal with an all-new Ghostface. But the reason we get an all-new Ghostface is because the story of the first film has been made into an in-universe movie called Stab. So just how the killers of the first film were inspired by horror movies, the killer here is inspired by the first Scream movie. In this self-referential nature, it isn't all nostalgia bait. It serves an important role in this film and creates a truly unique vibe for this movie that I can't say I've ever witnessed a sequel do something like this before. And just like how the first movie plays off of horror movie tropes, this movie plays off of sequel tropes. Most notably how sequels can be derivative and people try really hard to spice things up, and in my opinion, sequels are usually worse than the original. Not always, but usually. I don't know if that's really the case here though, because I liked how this movie recreates scenes from the first as a movie in this movie. I like the tension created by all sorts of people being out and about wearing Ghostface costumes, because like the real world after the first Scream movie, he's become a pop culture phenomenon in the world of the movie. And I also like the commentary on whether art and media influence violence, and how an all-new character becoming Ghostface, it makes him dangerous because he's an all-new character with his own motivations and his own skill set and his own personality and all that sort of stuff. It makes things fresh and still keeps the horror. I think this film takes the story in a great direction and is a worthy sequel to the original, so I think it's great. I do think it gets a little too goofy at the end, but I'm going to put it in a high A tier. I don't think it quite beats out the original, but I still think it's really, really good. 3 years later, Wes Craven returns for the third time to direct Scream 3, which follows the in-universe movie of Stab 3, and how our main characters Sidney, Gale, and Dewey become intertwined with the film's production as yet another Ghostface emerges. Like the previous two films playing off the tropes of horror films and sequels, this one leans into the conversations about trilogies, but also film production and the darker sides of Hollywood. It's Scream at its most metatextual, and like the previous film, I think that's the perfect direction to take things in. While it does do things to keep it fresh, like focus on the process of making a movie about the movies we've seen, taking a more comedic tone, giving this Ghostface more voice changer tools to work with, and having them hunt down the cast of the film based on the various scripts that are floating around. This is happening in the movie, but this is all a play on the leaks that Scream 2 had in our real world. With all that being said, I can't help but feel Like, it is ever so slightly starting to get stale because of all that and how it leans even more into the silliness. Not that I think it's necessarily a problem, but some parts of the movie felt a little too ridiculous. I will say it's good. I still think it's a good movie, and I'm going to put it in a high B tier. All in all, this is a pretty good trilogy, and it wraps up nicely too. While the story pretty succinctly concluded in the last film, 11 years later, we've got Wes Craven and the crew bringing it back for Scream 4, or as it's stylized, Screform. So if things ended last time, what could this movie possibly be about? Well, it's a commentary on remakes, of course, but don't worry, it's self-aware about its meta placement in the horror sphere, even aware that it's aware, like with the opening scene being a movie within a movie within a movie. It's hurting my brain describing that, but it's still a pretty good scene. Anywho, this is a brand new age, and the movie shows this off by showcasing how characters are aware of all these new horror movies that have released in between films. It highlights the rise of social media. It portrays influencer culture pretty accurately, fairly early on when this came out in only 2011, and it uses a really strange soft glow filter throughout the whole movie. That doesn't really have to do with the other things I mentioned, but I just wanted to point that out. Now, I'm not really the biggest fan of soft reboots, but I think this one at least, advances the characters, changes some things up a little bit, and is self-aware enough that it doesn't really bother me so much, but at the same time, it does still feel like we're covering a lot of the same ground at times, even if it knows that it's covering the same ground. It's not my favorite of the Scream movies, but I feel like it has enough creative juices flowing to still be okay. And like the last film, I'm gonna put this one in B tier. Another 11 years later, several years after the passing of Wes Craven, directors Tyler Gillett and Matt Bettinelli-Olphin, whose names I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, bring back Scream once again. Not titled Scream 5, but simply Scream, because this is the era where we rename sequels after the original for some reason. Scream 5, which is just called Scream, is another soft reboot that covers the exact same ground as the last movie. Now, while it does do some things different, like removing the weird glow filter, it's more gruesome than ever, it doesn't feel quite as comedic, and focuses mostly on a new, uninteresting group of friends who pretty much all happen to be related to characters of the previous films. For a series about being self-aware and each film covering something different about horror movies, it's really disappointing that this one follows the same outline as the last. It feels like we've been there, done that, but not in the clever way that the series is known for, with characters that aren't as appealing as the originals and nothing new to say about the horror genre. It doesn't push things far enough in a unique direction like the other films had done so far, and has a really contrived death scene that made my eyes roll, and by the end of it I started to cringe with how characters would survive a ridiculous amount of stab wounds, and how over the top the villain reveals were, especially the fact that the villain's motivations have pretty much no connection to the main protagonist and her being the daughter of Billy Loomis, the original killer. It just fell really flat in my eyes, it tread into generic horror territory, it offered nothing new. And this is about like the biggest sin that you could commit as a Scream movie. This is supposed to be the meta-aware slasher film, and it's become just a generic slasher film. Honestly, I thought it was bad. And maybe that's a hot take among some Scream fans, because I know a lot of them like this movie, but I really didn't like this one. And I'm going to put it in, I don't know, D tier or whatever. Don't think about it too hard. I don't like it. So it's in a low tier, okay? 1 year later, the same creative team and cast return for a direct sequel to Scream 5, which is just called Scream, with Scream 6, which uses the Roman numeral 6 instead of the Arabic numeral. And this time we're moving the series from the fictional town of Woodsboro to New York City. While I do feel like a dense urban environment like the Big Apple is a cool change of scenery for the typical Ghostface shenanigans, I still found the main characters to be a bit boring, and the film's unwillingness to kill off any of them made it all feel a bit anticlimactic. And I guess that's really the only feeling I'm left with watching this. This is the 6th film in this series, and despite some changes to the settings and the main characters, the main character Sam having some violent urges of her own, being the daughter of one of the original killers, it doesn't feel like we're even satirizing slashers anymore, rather just following the same formula that those movies typically do. They keep bringing up how it's part of a franchise and referencing the older movies, but it doesn't feel like that's enhancing the plot this time around. And even then, that's not some new aspect of horror filmmaking the series hasn't talked about before. We've already gone into how, the killers in each subsequent movie are referencing the past, and it's all part of one big franchise like the stab movies that exist in the series of the films. It just, I'm struggling to give my thoughts here on this one because it just feels like there's something missing. Now, normally there isn't anything wrong with a sequel being straightforward or anything like that, but when the series began being the opposite of straightforward and twisting things and switching it up, I'm not so sure if being straightforward is enough at this point, especially the 6th movie. At the very least, it isn't another soft reboot, and I can tell they had some ideas like the setting, the focus pretty much exclusively on the new characters, and more ghost faces than ever before. I just think it's kind of meh. Like, it's just, I don't know. I'll just put it in C tier. I think it was... It tried to do more than the last movie, and I can respect it for that, but I don't think it really came together as something that I was a big fan of. After the actress who played Sam in the last 2 movies was fired for calling out the Israeli government and Jenna Ortega left alongside her in solidarity, and a director changed to Kevin Williamson, who by the way wrote the original movie, we completely ignore the cliffhanger of the last film to instead follow Sidney and her family as they are being targeted by Ghostface. Now that is a very basic description of the movie, but that is exactly what this movie is. There is no twist on the genre. It has nothing to say about horror movies. They do use AI to mask the true killer, but that has no statement to make about AI in the film industry. The entire thing follows the basic slasher formula and also has some basic parent-child drama sprinkled in for good luck. And it has the worst Ghostface reveal in the entire series, too. I would spoil it for you if I even remembered the names of the characters. So that should go to tell you how great that is. Now, I've talked about this with the previous 2 movies, but this is even more apparent here, and it could be because they had to change their plans for the movie. I don't know, but why did this series stop trying to be clever and cheeky with its commentary and put its focus more on being a traditional slasher film? We're at the 7th film now, and it feels like it has become exactly what it poked fun at to begin with, all the way in the opening scene of the very first film. It's not the worst film on its own, but as the 7th installment of the series, it's bad. It's become a snake eating its own tail at this point. It's offering nothing new. It has nothing to say. I was falling asleep when I watched it in the theater, and honestly, maybe it's just recency bias, but I'm going to throw this in F tier. Not because it's the worst movie I've ever seen. This isn't even what Scream is supposed to be about. No twists, no turns, no nothing. It is a straightforward, generic slasher movie, which is exactly what they were satirizing 30 years ago in the first movie. Between the first 4 films that I like, they covered a lot of interesting ground, satirizing slashers, sequels, trilogies, and remakes. But ever since Scream 5, which is just called Scream, it doesn't seem like they really have much left to say as the commentary starts taking a backseat, if it's even included at all, like the last one, which has nothing to say about horror movies. The tropes keep repeating themselves to a tiring degree, and we're not adding anything. If what made this series interesting to begin with is fading away and it doesn't really have anything to say, then why say anything at all? Well, the answer is money. They're making money. Unless they can figure out some interesting angle to look at the horror genre from, I don't really see a point in making another one of these. If you like the movies, though, that's fine. That's great. I'm glad you enjoy them. For me, I just think after the 4th film, it has become exactly what it was poking fun at. And not poking fun at in a bad way. It had reverence for horror movies, but now it's just a generic horror film, which is not at all what Scream should be. But those are my thoughts on the Scream franchise as a first-time watcher. What do you think of the Scream movies? Have you ever seen them? You should definitely watch the first one if you haven't. If you agree or disagree with any of my hot takes, let me know in the comments below. Share it with people who might find this interesting. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already. And I will see you all next time. But until then, take care of yourselves. Goodbye.